We came next to the island of Iola. There lived Iolus Hippotades, a friend of the immortal gods, in a floating island. Right round it was built a brazen wall unbreakable, and the rock ran up smooth and straight. Iolus had a family of 12 children, 6 daughters and 6 sons in their prime. The daughters he had given to the sons as wives. All these lived together, and dined with their father and their excellent mother. There is always a fine spread of victuals in infinite variety. All day and every day the house is full of the steam of cooking, and the courtyard resounds with busy noise. All night they sleep beside their faithful wives on bedsteads of neat joinery, covered with blankets and rugs. We entered this city with its fine houses, and there spent a whole month as guests. Iolus wanted to know all about Ilion and the Achaean fleet, and how they returned home, and I told him the whole history from beginning to end. When at last I spoke of leaving and asked him for help on our way, he was glad to consent and did everything he could. He gave me the skin of a 9-year ox, which he flayed for us and made into a bag, and in this he bolted up the blustering winds, for Cronion had appointed him to be manager of the winds, to hold them or to let them go as he liked. On board my ship he tied up the bag with wire of shining silver, so tight that not a breath could blow out. But he left the west wind free to blow, that it might carry our ships along. As it turned out, this was of no use, for we spoilt all by our own folly. 9 days we sailed, all day and all night. On the 10th day our native land came into sight. We came so close that we could see them tending their fires. All that time I had held the sheet in my hand and let no one else touch it, to make sure of a quicker passage home. But when I saw the island I fell into a deep sleep, for I was tired out. Then the men began to talk to one another, said there must be gold and silver in that bag, presents from the generous Iolus Hippotades, and this is the sort of thing they were whispering. Upon my word, the man is a prime favorite wherever he goes. Plenty of treasures from the spoils of Troy, and we who traveled the same road come home with empty hands. Now again, here is Iolus, obliging him with more generous gifts. Here, quick, let's look and see what he has got, how much gold and silver there is in this bag. A scandalous motion, but it was past. They opened the bag, the winds leapt out. At once a gale caught them and carried them off to sea, tearing their hair as they left their native land behind. This waked me up. I did not know what to do, whether to throw myself overboard and be drowned, or grin and bear it in the land of the living. Well, I just bore it and stayed where I was. I covered my head and lay down while the ships were driven by the gale back to the isle of Iolus, amid the lamentations of my companions. So we went ashore and took in fresh water, and the men had their meal beside the ships. When we had finished, I took with me a herald and one other, and went on to the house of Iolus. We found him feasting with his wife and children. When we entered the hall and sat on the threshold near the door, they called out in great astonishment, "What has brought you here, Odysseus? What ill luck has touched you? Surely we did everything we could to help you, that you might return safely to your native land or anywhere else you wanted to go." I answered sorrowfully, "Everything has been spoilt by the fault of my men, and sleep on the top of that. Confound it! Do help us, friends. We have the power." My coaxing was of no use. They were dumbfounded, and the father said, "Get out of this island at once, you miserable sinner. It is not permitted to comfort the enemy of the blessed gods. Get out of this. You are the gods' enemy come to my doors." Thus he turned me out of his house in deep distress. From that place we sailed on disheartened. The spirit of the men was worn out by the labor of rowing, all their own fault, for there was no wind to help us now. 6 days we carried on, all night and all day. On the 7th we reached the lofty stronghold of Lamos, Laestrygiana, and Telepylos, where herdsman hails herdsman as one brings in his droves and the other answers as he drives out his. There a man who could do without sleep could earn double wages, one by minding cattle, one by pasturing sheep, for the paths of day and night were close together. We entered a fine harbor, with precipitous cliffs running all round. At the mouth are 2 headlands projecting front to front, and the entry is narrow. All the others steered their ships in, and moored them inside the harbor close together, for there were no waves rising inside, large or small, only white calm all around. But I alone made fast my ship outside, at the very end of the point, hitching ropes over the rocks. Then I climbed the cliff and stood still to get a good view. There was no arable land or garden to be seen, but we saw smoke rising in the air. So I sent some men to find out who the natives were. 2 picked men with a third of their spokesmen. Then went ashore and proceeded along a leveled road which was used by carts to carry down wood from the hills into the city. They came across a girl close to the city, drawing water, the sturdy daughter of Laestrygonian Antiphates. She had come down to a running spring named Artacia, from which they used to get water for the city. The men stopped and asked who was king in those parts and who the people were. She answered at once and pointed out her father's lofty roof. When they entered the house, there they found his wife, a woman as big as the peak of a mountain, and they hated her at sight. She sent at once to summon her husband, Antiphates, from the town meeting. He gave them a murderous reception. One he grabbed at once and prepared for supper. The other 2 ran away and managed to get back to the ships. But the monster made a hue and cry through the city. Out came the Laestrygonians, rushing from every direction in thousands, great inhuman wretches like giants. They threw showers of stones from the cliffs, each as big as a man could lift, and a mighty din there was, smashing of ships and crushing of men. The giants speared them like fishes and carried them home for a horrid supper. While this massacre was going on in the deep harbor, I drew my sword and cut the hawsers of my ship and told my men to put their backs into it if they wanted to save their lives. Then row they did, with the fear of death to help them. We blessed the open sea when we got clear of those grim rocks. My ship was the only one which escaped. All the rest were lost. From that place we sailed on, glad enough to have come off with our lives, but sad to lose our companions. Next we reached the island of Aiaia, where Circe lived, a terrible goddess with lovely hair who spoke in the language of men, own sister to murderous Aeetes. Their father was Helios, who gives light to mankind, and their mother was Perse, a daughter of Oceanos. We brought our ship to the shore in silence, and some providence guided us into a harbor where ships could lie. There we spent 2 days and 2 nights on shore, eating out our hearts with weariness and woe. On the 3rd day, as soon as dawn showed the first streaks of light, I took spear and sword and climbed to a high place, where I had a look around to see if there was any one about or any voice to be heard. Standing on the top of a rock, I saw smoke rising into the air from the house where Circe lived in the middle of thick bushes and trees. When I saw the smoke glowing, I considered whether I should go and inquire. The best plan seemed to be that I should return first to our ship on the shore and give the men something to eat and then send out to inquire. Just as I came near to the ship, some god must have pitied me there so lonely and sent me a stag with towering antlers right on my path. He was going down to the river from his woodland range to drink, and the sun's heat was heavy on him. As he came out, I struck him on the spine in the middle of the back, and the spear ran right through. Down he fell in the dust with a moan and died. I set my foot on him and drew out the spear from the wound. Then I laid the body flat on the ground and pulled a quantity of twigs and withies, which I plaited across and twisted into a strong rope of a fathom's length. With this rope I tied together the legs of the great creature and strung him over my neck, and so carried him down to the ship, leaning upon my spear. I could not have carried him on the shoulder with one hand, for he was a huge beast. I threw him down in front of the ship and cheered at my friends with encouraging words as I turned from one to another. We are not going to die yet, my friends. For all our troubles, we shall not see the house of Hades before our day comes. While there's food and drink in the ship, don't let us forget to eat. We need not die of starvation at all events. They were all sitting about with their faces muffled up in their cloaks, but at my words they threw off the cloaks and got up quickly to stare at the stag lying on the beach, for he was a huge beast. When they had feasted their eyes on the welcome sight, they began to think of another kind of feast. So they swilled their hands in due form and got him ready. All day long until sunset, we sat enjoying ourselves with our meat and wine, and when the sun went down and the darkness came, he lay down to sleep on the seashore. As soon as morning dawned, I called my companions together and addressed them. My friends, we do not know east from west. We don't know where the sun rises to give light to all mankind, and where he goes down under the earth. Well then, what are we to do? We must try to think of something at once, and for my part, I can't think of anything. I have just been up on the cliffs to look around. We are on some island in the middle of the sea with no land in sight. The island is flat, and I saw smoke rising in the air above a coppice of bushes and trees. When I said this, their hearts were crushed with foreboding, for they remembered the doings of Laestrygonian Antiphates and the violence of that audacious cannibal, the goggle-eyed Cyclops. The tears ran down their cheeks, and much good it did to weep. However, I divided them into 2 parts of equal number, and chose a captain for each. When I took myself, the other I gave to an excellent man, Eurylochus. Quickly, then, we shook hands in a helmet, and out leapt the lot of Eurylochus. Off he went with his 22 men, groaning and grumbling, and we were left groaning and grumbling behind. They found in a dell the house of Circe, well built with shaped stones and set in a clearing. All round it were wolves and lions of the mountains, really men whom she had bewitched by giving them poisonous drugs. They did not attack the men, but ramped up fawning on them and wagging their long tails just like a lot of dogs playing about their master when he comes out after dinner, because they know he has always something nice for them in his pocket. So these wolves and lions, with their sharp claws, played about and pawed my men, who were frightened out of their wits by the terrible creatures. They stopped at the outer doors of the courtyard and heard the beautiful goddess within singing in a lovely voice. As she worked at the web on her loom, a large web of incorruptible stuff, a glorious thing of delicate gossamer fabric such as goddesses make. The silence was broken by Polites, who was nearest and dearest to me of all my companions, and the most trusty. He said, "Friends, I hear a voice in the house, some woman singing prettily at the loom, and the whole place echoes with it. Goddess or woman, let's go in and speak to her." Then they called her loudly. She came out at once and opened the shining doors and asked them to come in. They all followed her in their innocence. Only Eurylochus remained behind, and he suspected a trap. She gave them all comfortable seats and made them a posset, cheese and meal and pale honey mixed with Parmenian wine. But she put dangerous drugs in the mess to make them wholly forget their native land. When they had swallowed it, she gave them a tap of her wand at once and herded them into pens, for they now had pigs' heads and grunts and bristles, pigs all over except that their minds were the same as before. There they were then, miserably shut up in the pigstry. Circe threw them a lot of beech nuts and acorns and cornel beans to eat, such as the earth-bedded swine are used to. But Eurylochus came back to the ship to tell the tale of his companions and their unkind fate. At first he could not utter a word, he was so dumbfounded with this misfortune. His eyes were full of tears, his mind foreboded trouble. At last, when we were fairly flummoxed with asking questions, he found his tongue and told us how all his companions had come to grief. "We went out into the wood, as you told us. Most renowned thief found a well-built house in a dell, and there some one was singing loudly as she worked the loom. Goddess or woman, they called to her. She came out at once and opened the doors and asked them in. They all followed in the simplicity of their hearts, but I stayed behind because I suspected a trap. They all disappeared at once. Not a soul was to be seen, and I stayed there a long time to spy. When he heard this, at once I slung my sword over my shoulders, the large one, bronze with silver knobs, and the bow with it, and told him to go back with me and show me the way. But he threw his arms about my knees and begged and prayed without disguise. 'Don't take me there, my prince. I don't want to go. Let me stay here. I am sure you will never come back again, nor will anyone who goes with you. Let us get away with those who are here while we can. We have still a chance to escape the day of destruction.' But I answered, 'Very well, Eurylochus. You may stay here in this place, eat and drink beside the ship. But as for me, go I must, and go I will.'"